No, don't touch.
If everybody can just put your phones on mute.
Can everyone hear me? Okay. Thank you, first of all, very much for inviting me to share a little bit of what I know at this very special event. And this is going to be quite a condensed talk, as we don't have really a lot of time. I will say just a little bit about myself. I'm a medical doctor, trained in America, and did family practice residency and board certification after that at Brown. I've had a lifelong interest, not only in medicine, but in health promotion through many, many explorations to do with nutrition and also mind-body methods. And this is what got me to lifestyle medicine. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that is as we go on. I'd also like to apologize. I'm recovering from a very bad cold, so if I lose my voice or start coughing, don't worry, it will be all right. Okay, so I've just recently finished and actually retired from work in the National Health Service in the UK, where I've been working as a very conventional GP in an out-of-hours service. And I also, in parallel, have had for the last, I think, 5 or 6 years, a private clinic in Tel Aviv where I do consultations based on lifestyle medicine. I felt towards the end of a career, it's nice to not have a boss and to be able to give people the time and attention that I think they deserve and their health deserves. Hello, I'm Dr. Miriam Maisel. The title of my lecture is Food. Okay, yeah, that was no, that's fine. So the previous slide that I had wanted to show is from the first plant-based nutrition course based at a university in the UK, and this is the plant-based nutrition course at Winchester University. And most of what I'm talking about today is included in a lecture that I contributed to that course. So what is lifestyle medicine? Because it's a funny kind of term, and one could think it's something that is kind of fringy, that it is alternative, and so on. Lifestyle medicine grew out of the understanding by conventional medical doctors that many of our health problems are created by, influenced by our habits, such as what we eat, whether we are active or sedentary, whether we sleep well enough, whether we have good human relationships and social connections, whether we smoke, whether we drink or take drugs, and so on. And this was understood, but not really that much addressed in your conventional medical encounter, although these kind of things are found in every conventional medical guideline. So there was one doctor, Dr. Lianov, in America who is a public health doctor and a preventative medicine doctor, and she took the initiative to get experts from many fields in medicine together and come up with some standards as to what doctors should know about helping people through habits and lifestyle. And they came out with a statement, I think it says 2010, I think it actually was 2009, doesn't matter. But that statement about what doctors should know exactly relates to those areas that I was speaking about just a moment ago, nutrition, physical activity, and so on. And these became the basis of the curriculum for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and became the basis of qualification or certification that is offered through the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which now has been, there are many hundreds, if not several thousand doctors all over the world who now have this qualification and basic knowledge. It's the first truly international medical qualification that there is. So I hope you're getting the flavor that this is not, this is not alternative stuff. This is well within the mainstream. And as far as diet is concerned, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine says, for treatment, reversal, and prevention of lifestyle-related chronic disease, ACLM recommends an eating plan based predominantly on a variety of minimally processed vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And that is the essence of a whole food and plant-based diet. That's what you do eat. What you don't eat, or what you try to eat much, much less of, is processed foods and highly processed foods and animal-based foods. So it's a very simple concept. And in a little while, I'll talk about some of the evidence underlying this position. So there are many health conditions in which food has been shown to be effective as a treatment. And I'm going to talk just very briefly about a few of what I call the core clinical researches that I think every doctor should know about. They're detailed in the talk that I give on the university course. But for example, coronary artery disease is, depending where you live, either the number 1 or the number 2 cause of mortality, with cancer being the other one. So a whole food plant-based diet has been used to help people who had arteries that were so blocked, and who had so many surgeries and could no longer have bypasses and stents, and with resulting excellent results, which were life-saving and improved people's health and quality of life. Very similar dietary approach has been used by Dr. Barnard in the United States, who's the head of an organization called Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in DC. Almost identical diet with diabetes, and showed that the same diet could reduce the hemoglobin A1C as much as a single medicine. And similarly, Dr. Kempner, Dr. Swank, who are more historic but also important, use diet in specific conditions. And so we're talking basically here about what we call metabolic conditions, so heart disease, blood pressure, and diabetes. Then inflammatory autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid and lupus and things like that. And we know more recently from work that Dr. Ornish, who first worked with heart disease, he has done work with men who have prostate cancer and were in a situation where it was okay to kind of watch and wait. They didn't need any treatment right away. And so in this group, it was found that people who followed Dr. Ornish's protocol, same protocol as for heart disease, had much less progression of their cancer than the other group. So I'm going to just go into...
in the 1990s, there were 2 clinical studies which were published, and they showed that advanced coronary artery disease can be reversed using diet. And this was...
okay. Thank you very much. Okay, sorry, it's a slide from a recorded lecture that I did in the past. So thank you very much. So Dr. Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn, who are both still alive and working, published results in the early 1990s to do with what we're calling reversal of coronary artery disease. And up until then, the narrative had been, you have cholesterol, you have high cholesterol, you accumulate cholesterol in your blood vessels, and and eventually you'll have a heart attack or heart failure or a stroke. We might be able to slow it down, but we can't stop it and we can't make it go away. So the work of Dr. Ornish and Dr. Esselstyn showed that showed that with almost identical dietary protocols, actually the arteries could improve, and arteries that were narrowed could become more open, meaning that a person who was unable to walk across the room or up the stairs became able to do much more physical activity and had much fewer symptoms of angina, better exercise tolerance, much better quality of life, and in many cases, ability to avoid surgery which had been planned. So there are some minor differences between their protocols, like Dr. Esselstyn actually did use statin medication in some of his patients. They wanted to keep the cholesterol under 150. Dr. Ornish did not. Dr. Esselstyn included very frequent meetings with his patients. Dr. Ornish included relaxation, yoga, and support groups, but the dietary protocols were almost identical, and they didn't know about each other at the time when they were doing this work. They were working separately. Dr. Esselstyn is at Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Ornish is in California. So this is something that we really like to see in science, when people independently get the same results, because it really supports the reliability. Okay, so the next person I'll just touch on briefly, Walter Kempner. He did not use a whole food plant-based diet. He was the founder of the so-called rice diet. He was a Jewish doctor in physiology who, finding himself no longer able to work in Germany, was able to come to America and work at Duke University. And at that time, there were no medications for high blood pressure. And young people, relatively young people, developed what we call malignant hypertension, and there was they died very young. They had strokes and things very young. So with Dr. Kempner's protocol, what he the base of what he wanted to do, he said he wanted to kind of give the kidneys a break. This was his hypothesis. How would you do that? Reversing salt, fat, and protein in the diet. And he also had remarkable results with people who were grossly swollen and had enlarged hearts, had retinopathy, and with a dietary method, he was able to get people back to normal blood pressures, normal activity. What was in his diet was like white rice, little bit of fruit and sugar. So, you wouldn't necessarily give that to people today. There's no vegetables in it because they have sodium. But he was able to demonstrate that with the diet, it was possible to reverse these changes that were thought to be irreversible. And he was published in top medical journals at the time in the 1940s, as were Esselstyn and Ornish, and they continue to be published. And I just want to say a word about getting your things published in a medical journal, because, again, just to show how this is kind of the opposite of, the internet, where everyone can say what they want to, you don't have to back it up, you don't have any responsibility. To get yourself published in a medical journal, your study has to undergo a process called peer review, which means that it is looked at by experts in the field in terms of the methods, in terms of the validity of the methods, in terms of the validity of the outcomes. And only then will it be published. So it's extremely rigorous, and it's not a perfect process, but it is the most reliable information that we can get. So this is Dr. Roy Swank, and he was a neurologist, and he specialized in MS, and he observed that during World War II, when the Germans basically confiscated all of the meat animals from the countries that they conquered, in those places, the MS became much less common. And he felt his idea was that the blood flow to the nerves was impaired by a high-fat diet. And so he did a trial with a relatively small number of his patients, with only 15 grams of fat per day, which is probably less than 10% of calories from fat. The fats that he had people eat were vegetable, not animal. And sorry, I don't know why that keeps jumping. His study went on for 34 years. And at the end of the he was keeping track of people, but the final data that he recorded was after 34 years. The patients who kept to the diet well, most of them at that time were still ambulatory, still working, and none of them had died because of MS. In the group of patients who did not keep to the diet well, many of them did pass away. Many of them were bed-bound or wheelchair-bound, and their level of functioning was much, much less than the group that adhered to the diet. So this is more to do with saturated fat in the diet. But if you have, or your family member has MS, and you go to a neurologist, you're very unlikely to hear about Dr. Swank or about, there's a Dr. Jelinek in Australia who is a doctor and also has MS and who's done a lot of work and collected a lot of data. So it hasn't yet entered the mainstream. Nutritional treatment for rheumatoid arthritis. So this was a Scandinavian doctor who used basically a whole food plant-based diet with patients of his with rheumatoid arthritis. Patients who had a lot of symptoms were on medications and so on. And it was found after a year that the patients who kept well to the diet had recorded their symptoms, and they had a lot of relief of their symptoms and also had relief. They had reduction of inflammation on lab tests. So the experiment supposedly was a year, and at the end of the year, he said to everybody, well, thank you very much for volunteering. He sent them home, experiment is over, you can eat whatever you like. And then after a year, he invited them back. And it was found that the patients who had, once again, the patients who had experienced relief of their symptoms kept to the diet on their own, even though the experiment was over. And I mention this because I found this paper when I was looking at what did the UK rheumatology guidelines say. And it's a 250-page document, of which 5 pages has to do with nutrition. And this was the only study mentioned with what they called vegetarian nutrition. And the conclusion of the guidelines was that a vegetarian diet could be helpful, but it's not palatable, so nobody would eat it. But here, right in this study, it shows that patients in Scandinavia, anyway, who experienced the benefits of a diet were very ready to continue with dietary changes on their own. So my conclusion there was that the authors of the guidelines themselves don't like vegetables. That's what I learned anyway. But again, this is a study that was published in The Lancet, which is another top medical journal, and you really have to have very good data, very watertight study and conclusions in order to get published in there. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to skip over Dr. Furman, but he's someone that you should know about. This is actually the wrong slide. I wanted to present a different one of his researches. But I want to talk just a minute about the common ground with the whole food plant-based diet, generally avoids processed oils, processed foods, uses minimal added salt, and because it eliminates animal foods, it is naturally low in saturated fat, which we know is very bad for our blood vessels. There are multiple kind of side benefits rather than side effects, because generally in the studies that were about diabetes, the blood pressures also got better. In the studies about blood pressure, the cholesterol also got better. So you don't need a special different diet for different conditions. So this means that medication can be reduced, surgery may not be necessary, and then we know that these elements of miraculous Western medicine do have risks. And so if you don't have to go there, that's great, because you're then not exposed to the iatrogenic risks. And then the whole food plant-based diet can be individualized to maximize the benefit. So here again is where you can find more detailed analysis if you decide to do the course at the University of Winchester. And that talk itself is based on a chapter that I contribute to a medical textbook that I hope some doctors are reading and drawing the right conclusions from. So we've known for a long time that vegetarian and vegan diets, if you plan correctly, for example, make sure you take a vitamin B12 supplement, they are safe. They're safe for all stages of life. This is a statement from the American Dietetic Association from about 15 years ago. It's still true. So I'm going to skip over here, but just to say that because we have all this information, so why isn't everybody doing it, and why haven't things changed? And I show this slide frequently. It was article published in the British Medical Journal, 1950, definitely linking lung cancer with smoking. Now, the USA Surgeon General acknowledged this 15 years later. And, you know, anybody who's as old as me will remember that there was smoking in public places, in airplanes, and trains, and buses, and restaurants, and everywhere you can imagine, until the late 1990s. So it takes time, even when things are proven, even when things are based on the best of science, it takes time for things to enter policy and to come into the general society. So all I want to say is that I know that we're on the right track. We don't have to wait, you know, until somebody else says it's all right. We know there's the evidence, the guidelines, I believe will come later, but they are already changing, because here is the Canadian Dietary Plate guideline, and on the protein side, they have some animal foods, but they've got lots of beans and lentils, and we never saw that before. And a conservative organization such as the American Medical Association recommends that the dietary guidelines clearly state that meat and dairy are optional. You don't have to have anything from your meat food group, your dairy food group. So this is quite big. The last point I want to make is that by opting for plant-based foods, we are reducing the harm that our consumptions cause to the environment. And here is another excellent paper. If anyone enjoys reading 49-page scientific papers, I would say go and look for this one. Multidisciplinary paper to do with health, farming, and ecology, showing that we could feed a population of 10 billion people on this planet in the year 2050 without exceeding the guidelines for how much hotter we're going to make it, by drastically reducing animal food consumption, and also that it is not necessary for health to consume any animal foods. And there is in that paper what they call planetary health diet, which I would suggest really having a look at that. Some resources: Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine in America. They have done a lot to get animal experimentation out of medical schools, and a lot to get unhealthy food out of hospitals. My favorite organization which is the Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. They're amazing. They have fact sheets. They have, they were actually responsible for the development of this university course. And that is it. One more thing, favorite resource, the wonderful book, Vegan Revolution, Saving Our World, Revitalizing Judaism, written by my friend and colleague, Professor Richard Schwartz, who's here today. Go and buy it, read it, and you will love it. And that's how to reach me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maisel.